Hello everyone, my name is James Sims, and as well as being a PE teacher and business owner, I am the host of the Changing Rooms podcast. I'm delighted to welcome you to episode 1 of series 2. Series 2 contains 4 episodes entirely focused on the teaching of physical education, and our first guest is Phil Mathe. Phil is a fascinating colleague. He is head of physical education at the British International School of Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, having changed roles from being director of co-curricular provision at Al Ain, Abu Dhabi in summer 2022. Phil has also taught and led in schools as far-reaching as Cairo, Nairobi, and Kent, England. It is this broad experience that has allowed Phil to join me today on the verge of his first book, Happiness Factories, being published on the 28th of October 2022 by John Catt Publications. Happiness Factories is a collaborative tour de force containing countless case studies of good PE practice from all over the globe. If you want to know what outstanding PE looks like in the US, Australia, Africa, or Asia, Happiness Factories is the book for you. Phil believes in a rich and context-driven approach to curriculum design and provides the evidence for his approach in his studies and his writing. Phil is also a Master of Education, having completed his MA in 2022. Phil, welcome to the Changing Rooms.
Hi, James. How are you?
Good, thank you. Good to see you. Good to do this for on another occasion. And
I know. Am I your second guest?
You are. Yeah, that is a massive compliment. Plus,
it really is.
Plus, you were stupid enough to give me your phone number. So,
well, that's true. Yes, absolutely. How are you? Very well.
Really good, thank you. Really good. Looking forward to getting this out, actually, because I think there's a hunger for this kind of resource that I've been asked a lot of times. When's the next podcast coming out? When's the next episode? When's series 2 coming out? So very much looking forward to getting this out to people and seeing what people think. Phil, you've got a book right on the verge of being published. In fact, before we came on, you were saying to me, okay, 2 weeks as we sit here today on the 28th of October is when it's officially being published by John Catt Publications, but you were sort of suggesting it might even be arriving to people a little bit earlier. So here's my question to you. Why should PE teachers pre-order and read Happiness Factories?
So it's a good question. There's a lot of really good books out there at the moment about PE, and I don't think there's ever been a better time to be a research-driven PE teacher, and some fantastic work going on. But I think Happiness Factories is slightly different in that I wanted to provide a platform for teachers that are not necessarily teaching in just the UK, but internationally. There's an awful lot of us working in schools across the world that adopt either British curriculums or a British approach to physical education. And there's some really amazing work going on, like you said in your introduction, from the Americas right the way through to the Far East, the Southeast Asia and Australia. And I think Happiness Factory sort of taps into that a little bit and provides a bit of a platform for some of these really outstanding PE educators and PE researchers and PE academics to sort of get their voice heard in a way that it perhaps hasn't been as much recently or up to this point. So why should people read it? People should read it because I think it's an interesting story. It's my story. It's my story as a PE teacher starting off in the UK and then moving abroad. But it's also the story of 20 odd other PE teachers and where they are with their thinking about PE and what PE can be in their context. And I think the message that really shines through from all of those contributions is that their context is so important, and context-driven PE is really fundamental to what we're all trying to do today. And so I just wanted to provide a platform for not just myself but for other educators to really be heard.
It's an interesting one because, of course, you refer to that kind of UK-centric sort of perspective that many of us might have. I'm certainly an example of that. And of course, PE largely has its historical context in sort of development in the UK and what have you. And then you refer to that context-driven approach. And like the question that just sprang to my mind there, is how wide a context are we talking about here? How varied does this get? How different is it out there? And what do your experiences from researching and writing the book tell you might be the answer to that?
Yeah, I think So this has been a 3-year process, really, from start to finish. And when I first started out, I had no understanding of what drove my PE provision or our PE provision in terms of our context. But what I don't think I really realised was just how different PE looks in different contexts, whether that's geographical contexts or political contexts or demographic related contexts. There's such a diversity of physical education, of what physical literacy means within different communities. And over the course of the 3 years, what I've come to realise is it's vast. It's vast, and every different situation is unique. That there is no one size fits all. I mean, a lot of us that come from the UK have a perception of what PE was, and I think a lot of us have a perception of what PE is becoming. But then you talk to people from Australia, and it's flipped on its head, and then it's very, very different. And what it was different, and what it's becoming is different again. And then I did some research into PE in New Zealand as part of the book, and their approach to physical literacy. And whilst there are similarities and differences, the cultural context that sort of shines through the New Zealand PE curriculums and the educational curriculums in general was something that I hadn't really seen before. And then you start looking at I had a really interesting conversation, which is in the book, with some guys in China, where they have a very prescriptive curriculum that they have to follow, certain things that they are mandated to do by government agencies. And then you start to understand that their context is driving PE in a slightly different way there. And then I've got people from South America, where kind of the creative side of PE is really at the fore at the moment. And you know, that idea of bringing through South American influences into creative PE curriculums, it's just, there's a whole world of stuff out there, some of which is very similar to what we see in the UK, some of it's vastly different, and tapping into all of those bits is really the way I believe that we can provide real meaning in our unique curriculums with our pupils at the absolute centre of it.
So let's take an example. You've made the transition in recent months. You've gone from teaching in Abu Dhabi, where, you know, I'm broadly aware of the kind of curriculum you guys were putting on. It was highly specific. It was relevant in the local environment. You've made that transition to Saudi Arabia, specifically Riyadh. You've taken on a role that enables you to absorb a new context and apply a new curriculum. How does that transition look? How does, at this stage, albeit early in your Riyadh work, what does it look like, that change?
Yeah, it's interesting because it's actually, geographically, it's not that far, and culturally, it's fairly similar. And yet the differences in the schools is dramatic. I mean, I'm in a quite fortunate position, and the reason that I came here, and BISR would want me to say this, the reason that I came here is that it really is a blank sheet of paper. It's a new campus with a new senior school. It was a pre-existing primary school, but it's a new secondary school following the international middle years curriculum for Key Stage 3, which I've not experienced before. So that was an opportunity to experience a new curriculum direction for me. But it really is, that blank sheet of paper, and in a school that is a very holistically driven school, which obviously, for those of you that read the book will understand, that's really fundamental to me, that idea of holistic curriculums, about finding links between curriculum strands, between subject areas, and between what we offer and the lives that the children are experiencing and are going to experience as they grow up. So I've like you said, it is really early days, and there's an awful lot of the logistical things you have to do before you can really sit down and start thinking about your why and your who and your what and all of those things. But the idea of building something with no boundaries, with no real prescriptive framework, was just, I mean, for me, it was too good an opportunity to turn down.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Phil, is that what took you there? Is that almost the context which for you was attractive in the role?
Yeah, I think if I'm completely honest, it was. We had a very holistic, very concept-driven curriculum at Brighton College. By the time I left, it was really fundamentally based on a concept-driven curriculum, and so obviously, because of the type of PE teacher that I am, that is going to follow me into my new role. But that opportunity to build something that takes the best of what I perceive to be the best of things from different areas of the world, and interact with different PE teachers from different places and get ideas from different areas and put that all together into something that really provides meaning for this particular group of students. It's exciting. I feel invigorated again to build another curriculum. It's the fourth curriculum that I've built since I've been abroad, but this one feels like it could be something really personal and really powerful within this particular region. So it's exciting. It's exciting. It's quite nerve-wracking at times, and it's been quite a stressful first half term. But yeah, I'm enjoying every minute of it.
What's in your mind? Obviously, the timescale of a curriculum is endless. One is always refining and reflecting and improving, of course. But from your perspective at the moment, how long is the job? I don't necessarily mean how long you're going to be working at school, but how long is the job in the sense that, okay, to implement the curriculum that Phil currently perceives, it's going to take 2 years, it's going to take 3 years, it's going to take 5. How are you perceiving that?
Yeah, well, you hit the nail on the head that it never really stops, does it? And every curriculum, every PE teacher watching, listening to this will be on that pathway of constant evolution, because our schools change and our cohorts change and our demographics change and our budgets change and our facilities grow or shrink or whatever it might be. So it's a never-ending process. But I believe that this curriculum won't be fully embedded until an entire cohort has gone through a significant chunk of it, because we really need to prove it. It's all very well creating a curriculum that feels like it's right for you, but it's really more important that it's proven to be right within your school. And the only way to do that is to see pupils go through a decent chunk of it, to look at what that does to uptake rates for things like GCSE PE and IB. We're an IB school, so part of that will be how many pupils are enthused to take the subject more academically. What are the transition points looking like over a period of time? So what are our year sixes coming through into year 7 with? How are they leaving the school and where are they going? What are they doing afterwards? I don't think you can put a timescale on it, but it's definitely not a short-term process. You can build a curriculum in a year. Fundamentally, the nuts and bolts of our curriculum will be built over the course of this academic year as we go along. So what we haven't done, and I think if I was talking to teachers that were thinking about changing or developing their curriculum, is we haven't built it all up front. We haven't sat down and said, right, new curriculum, let's put it together for a whole year. Right, we've built a framework. We know what concepts we're teaching. We know what activity strands we're linking them to. But the actual nuts and bolts, we're working about a term ahead of ourselves. Because at the end of the day, we're all teaching all the time. And that fundamentally, that's the most important thing. So you have to give yourself time to build it. And then you have to give yourself more time to see the fruits of your labor sort of in the pupils that you're delivering it to.
You mentioned something there, which I think is really interesting. One of the things that's just been flashing through my mind is which of the following 4 roles that I think you portray, Phil, is the most central and most pivotal? Because I think, amongst other things, Phil, I know, at home you're a father and a partner, of course, those things too, but I think you're a teacher, I think you're a leader, I think you're a manager, and I think you're a curriculum designer as well as an author. Out of those things, how do you Which of those stands the tallest day to day for you? And which of those is the prominent experience of your work?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. I was having this similar conversation with one of my senior leaders this week, actually, about leadership and management. And I think it varies. I think it changes. So I'm a husband and a father first and foremost, and I would encourage everybody that works within our little bit of the education sector to put that at the forefront, because PE is so demanding, like physically, emotionally, mentally, that you've got to make time for yourself. You've got to make time to rest and recuperate and recharge regularly. Otherwise, the risk of burnout is huge. And especially for people listening to this from the UK, I really feel for you guys at the moment, because you have all the same pressures that we have, plus a whole load more. So that's really important. But in terms of the actual work, it fluctuates. So I felt that recently I've probably been more of a manager than a leader, because we've got to get things up and running and tough decisions have to be made, and people look to you for short-term solutions. But really fundamentally, I'm a teacher, and it doesn't matter what else I do. It doesn't matter what else I write or research. I am a teacher. I get the most enjoyment when I'm with pupils, engaging in physical activity with them in unique and exciting ways that they are enjoying and getting benefit from. So I think I always try and put that above everything else. Like, we've had a relatively tough week here with illness this week, so I found myself doing quite a lot of cover, which I actually really enjoy. I actually like that sort of buzz of being really busy as a teacher. Jumping from lesson to lesson, thinking on your feet, adapting to things as you go, trying to maintain the curriculum focus, but at the same time, perhaps being a little bit more flexible with the way you're approaching things, because you're covering somebody else and you don't want to step too much on their toes. So it sort of reminded me again, actually, how much I enjoy that teaching, just the nuts and bolts of why we did what we did when we became PE teachers.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I when I asked that question, although it's quite a specific one, I was thinking about sort of heads of PE listening to this and thinking, okay, how does Phil see himself? What's his primary role? What does he put first, second, or third? And you're right, the different moments, the different cycles that we go through will prioritize different aspects of this. I think I wonder if there's an argument that generally people in that middle management role or heads of PE, directors of sport, whether there's a general tendency to see curriculum design as a little bit lower down the rung than perhaps it ought to be at this particular moment in time. I sort of see PE going through a transition. And it's hard to, I'm only speculating really, but I'm wondering if that's an area of that role that people either should or could give a little bit more centrality to, perhaps.
Yeah, I think I mean, it's central to what we do, because with good curriculum design, with creative curriculum creation, comes that enthusiasm from teachers and pupils that then breeds that culture of engagement that we're all looking for. Wherever we are, we're all looking for increased engagement, positivity, success-driven provision. That's what we're aiming for. It doesn't matter whether your curriculum is concept-based or very sports-driven or very competitive or very kind of recreational mover focused. What we're looking for at the end of the day is engagement, positive attitudes towards physical activity and healthy living, and lifelong engagement with whatever your activity might be. Those are the things that we're really looking for, regardless. And I think good curriculum design, clever curriculum design, goes a long way towards achieving that, because the more thought you put into your curriculum in relation to the pupils that you're delivering it to, the more likely you are to get that increased engagement year on year, term on term, and that will drive all of those other things. And I've seen it. I've seen it twice, and I'm hoping I'm going to see it again with putting the pupils at the center of what you're trying to create, and then working outwards from that, thinking about variety of activity, thinking about gamification of activities, about alternative provision, about inclusivity, all of these things that we talk about as PE teachers all the time now. But when you put your pupils at the center of that, and you look at them as a group of individuals who all have individual needs, and we want to cater for all of them, then you start to build things that will really provide meaning and get that engagement, get that buzz, and it just grows from there. So it is really important, but it's also the thing that's the most time consuming. You have to set aside time for curriculum design. You absolutely can't do it on your own. You can create a framework, and specifically talking to sort of PE leaders, I guess. You can create a framework, you can create a vision, but I've found the best way to get engagement is through collaboration with your colleagues, and all of your colleagues bring skills to the table, bring knowledge to the table that you may or may not even recognize initially, but that collaboration brings unity and engagement that then breeds enthusiasm for what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But it's a tough gig. Curriculum design is not easy, and especially when you're not just taking something off the shelf and putting it into your school and then tinkering around the edges. When you're starting with a blank sheet of paper with a circle and pupils in the middle of it. I mean, you and I have done this. We've sat down and drawn that circle.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of thought. It takes a lot of consideration. You need to listen to your pupils. You need to listen to your colleagues. You have to take the time to reflect and discuss and argue and disagree and come together and compromise and all of these things. But the outcome is a curriculum that genuinely provides meaning because it's built around your pupils at any given time.
It's really interesting what you're talking about there. I spent a lot of my career in curriculum design in my own framework, and I, as I've said many times, I don't consider myself any kind of expert on what I would consider to be core or practical PE. I'm as good as the next person at it, and what my strength came around management of academic PE courses and the design of those. And I always felt in my mind that the most important process was repeated divergence and convergence of ideas. So having the divergence to open up, to collaborate, to discuss, to share, to have more creative and open conversations, then to bring them back to the core of what the values were that were included. And then at another point, diverge again and look again. I always felt that divergence, convergence model, it was almost like a pulsation, change, review, refine. That for me was one of the critical things. But what I want to do here, Phil, is I want to take us back to the book in a generic sense to begin with, and I want to get into some of the specifics. Okay, so I want to ask you this. I think that one of the things you must be incredibly proud of the book is that it's published by a brilliant publisher in John Catt Publications. So that alone, I think, is incredible. But I just wanted to ask you, at the point as the book is about to hit the stands, as it were, what is the source of the biggest pride or contentment for you with regard to Happiness Factories?
It is a good question. Right now, I have a mix of complete trepidation, and I think you know me well enough to know that I will tell it like it is. A little bit, quite a lot of trepidation over how it will be received, and I think that's pretty natural. I think for anyone, especially first-time authors. But yeah, I'm immensely proud. I think there's two things. I'm proud of the fact that I had the commitment to the process. I think it would have been. It started off as my weekly and daily kind of internal ramblings about what I was going through in Cairo, what I'd experienced previously in Kenya, and trying to make sense of my situation. And then it turned into kind of bloggy type articles that I was writing and posting, and no one was reading, and that was fine because it wasn't for anyone else. It was just for me to try and kind of formulate my thoughts into coherent sentences in my head. And then one day, just before COVID hit, really, I thought, well, I've probably got enough here to actually tell a bit of a story. But it's been a long process. It's been a long process. Like, if anybody tells you that writing a book is easy, they've either written a very, very short book, or they're probably not telling the entire truth, because it was a it was a hard process. And I'm not particularly academically minded. I was fairly average at English at school. I wouldn't say I'm just a PE teacher. That's what I am. I'm not an English teacher. I've never really written anything more than dissertations for university and things like that before. So it was just a big undertaking. The fact that I've got to the point where I've seen it right to the end, regardless of who reads it. And I hope people do read it. I hope people enjoy it. And I hope people take something from it. But regardless of whether people read it or not, I think having got over the line, having done it, having experienced it, it's something that I always thought I wanted to do. So that gives me immense satisfaction. I would say pride in my colleagues as well, actually. I think, and that's really important to me, because this isn't just my book. I put it together, and a lot of the words are mine, but there are some of the most powerful words have actually come from other people. And I feel immensely proud of them for having committed the time and wanting to contribute to something that will exist, hopefully, for a very long time within our space. And every now and again, people might come across it and read it and go, oh, I hadn't thought of that, or I'm amazed that they're doing that in that particular country. I might think about doing that in my curriculum. And yeah, that just makes me feel good, to be honest. And whether I'll do it again, I don't know. I'm still debating that, but the process has been really rewarding, and I've learned a huge amount. I've learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about PE. I've learned a lot about how to research PE and understand different types of PE and what PE means and what physical literacy means and what meaningful PE means. And yeah, the book touches on it. I mean, I could have, in fact, the first draft of the book was 130 something thousand words, and I had to basically cut it in half because I wrote so much of what I was learning down on paper that it was, no one would ever have been able to get through it. So yeah, it's been a really rewarding process, but I think I'm most proud of the collaboration that I've had with other people throughout the process, I think.
And I really echo that, because as sitting here now as someone who's got the book arriving, that's the thing that excites me, because how do I, as a PE teacher, how do I get the opportunity to sense, to feel, and to understand that context in, as you refer to, as in the Americas, in Australia, in Southeast Asia, wherever it happens to be. That for me is the air quotes USP. That's what I want to read. But I also want to pick up on something you said there, which is, you talked about your own learning, and I think that's a very valuable point to reflect on, because you've gone through a journey here, which, let's be honest, is a challenging one. It's a tough one. You and I have spoken numerous times along that journey, and it is a hard thing to do. And I think at the heart of it, that is a really beautiful thing to be able to say, is that, this has taken me through a process that maybe I wouldn't have gone on in any other context. And I've come out as a stronger colleague, teacher, I'm sure, in a personal life, father, husband, as you mentioned as well. And I think that's fantastic. But I also want to pick up on the word trepidation here. There's no sort of pretty way to ask this question about, so I'll ask it like this, Phil. So someone's going to read it and someone's going to message you on Twitter and go, I disagree with X, Y, Z. How do you perceive that some weeks before that inevitability, I guess?
What I might do is go and hide under a rock for a month. No, obviously it's going to happen. Obviously, you could write any book about any type of PE or any style of PE, and there will be people that don't necessarily have the same perception as you do, and that's absolutely fine. And I think we're all realistic enough to understand that there are different types of PE. Like, PE is not one size fits all. I like to say sometimes to people that, and actually I got called up on this, but I still stick with it. Maths is maths. There are different ways of doing maths depending on where you are in the world, but fundamentally maths is maths, and there is a certain set of things that you have to be able to do to be successful in maths. And there are other subjects that are like that as well. The periodic table is the periodic table, and however you teach that, it is the periodic table. Whereas PE is different, because PE takes into account the culture that you're working in, and the demographic of pupils that you're working with, and the colleagues that you have sitting around you. and the outcomes that you're looking for, and the outcomes that your government agencies or your awarding bodies or your curriculum providers are looking for. It's so diverse and it's so context driven that we're never going to find consensus, really. And I don't necessarily think we need to. And I don't have a problem with people saying, I don't think you're right, because in their context, I might not be. What I hope is that everybody can find something within my view of what PE can be that they think, well, yeah, I could add that in. I don't necessarily need to get rid of anything, but I could add that thing in, and maybe that will give my pupils a new experience or a new learning opportunity. What the book does not do, and it says this a couple of times at the start, is what it doesn't provide you with an off-the-shelf solution. There are books out there that do that really, really well, at the moment, by people far more knowledgeable and researched than I am at this stage. If you want an off-the-shelf product, whether it's concept-based or fundamental movement-based or whatever, they are out there. Go and get them. They're brilliant. This is not that type of story. I'm not taking you on that journey. What I'm doing is I'm trying to get you to think about things you could build on top of your provision, not changing necessarily your provision. Don't throw everything you've got away. Just look for those other things, those other opportunities. And throughout the whole book, really the core message, and the message that I present about now, and I do CPD with departments about, and I talk to people about all the time, is that word success. And again, people disagree with this. People don't necessarily all see success in the same way that I do. But I fundamentally believe that success drives an awful lot of what we're trying to achieve. And if we can identify success in pupils in many, many different ways, then more of our pupils will get the chemical release, their physiological sensations that come with being praised, with feeling successful, with achievement, and that will drive engagement. So if you've got a really good curriculum that works really, really well at a competitive level, and I had a conversation with a school a couple of weeks ago, actually, that have a fantastic curriculum, but it is very sport focused and very competitive sport focused because of the nature of the type of school they are, and the pressures that come with being that type of school within their community. And what we talked about was what else can we put, where can we put another layer on top of what you do? So don't change anything that you do, but what else can we look for so that the pupils that perhaps don't make your first teams, or that don't feel that sense of success in a sporting context within your PE lessons, might be able to feel a sense of success in terms of their collaborative skills, or their the sense of resilience, or resilience towards problem solving, or their ability to recall knowledge, or their creativity. And really what I want people to consider is whether there are things that you can talk about, whether there's terminology that you can add into your curriculums that give you the opportunity to go up to Thomas in your year 7 class and say, you communicated with your partner really, really well there, Thomas. That was fantastic. Well done. Or, Thomas, your leadership skills in that particular game situation were outstanding, rather than, Thomas, you were fantastic at scoring 3-point throws in basketball. Mm-hmm. There are other things that we can identify as success that give the children that dopamine, that endorphin hit that makes them go away thinking, I was good today and I want to be good again. So I'm going to try even harder because I want to feel that sense of being successful. And that message really is what the book is trying to say. Whether it says it will be up to people to decide.
Well, it's really interesting because for me, the two strongest terms that come through your writing, one is about a curriculum potentially being holistic, and the other one is, as you're referring to here, success driven. But it's interesting what you've just done in my mind, because you've just made me consider and accept that in order for a curriculum to be success driven, it has to be holistic enough that teachers, let's call them PE teachers can recognize a range of different behavioral successes, because they are holistically viewing the activities, the experiences, the behaviors that are going on in front of them. So it may well be actually that one of the first steps for colleagues is to open up their mind just to what success looks like and how you actually identify that. Is that fair, Phil?
Yeah, completely. And again, just like PE is contextual, success is contextual as well. And every pupil's perception of what success is unique and subjective. And I think the starting point is understanding that success looks different to different pupils within our schools, and really success is self-determined and should be self-determined. So our pupils should be able to articulate to us what they deem success looks like to them at any given time, and that changes as they grow. So as they mature, their perception of success changes, and we can influence that in a positive or a negative way. And I've seen it done really well positively, but I've also seen it really impact children in a negative way when success becomes more and more about competitive outcome, and the perception of success changes towards that if you allow that to happen within your sort of pathway through a school. But yeah, when you identify different types of success and success. Again, I had a really interesting conversation with somebody who I quite regularly have conversations with, and he challenges me on things, which I think is really, really helpful for me. But he said, is success an outcome at the end of a process, or is success the stepping stones towards an outcome? And that's a really philosophical question, but it's also a fundamental question that the individual departments need to decide on. And there isn't a right or wrong answer to that. I think for some schools, you can see success as the assessment at the end of a unit of work, or the number of pupils that come to your extracurricular activities, or very finite objective things that you can report on, you can feed back to senior leadership. But then there are also schools out there that take the perception of success back a bit and say, well, we can identify success in little stages, stepping stones across a river. And we can praise a child for something, even if the final outcome wasn't successful. We can find the successful bits on that pathway. They still get that dopamine, that endorphin rush from being praised for that, even if the final outcome perhaps wasn't, for them, a successful one.
Yes, it's quite a big mentality shift as well, isn't it? Because I don't know why it takes me there. It's taken me to the classic notice board where we put a brilliant piece of student work on the board, or an achievement, or a score, or a record, or whatever it happens to be. And what we're perhaps arguing here is that that's contextual. Well, what did the week before that piece of work or that time was run, or whatever it is that we're posting, what was being done the week before? Because it could have been even better. It could have been the same. Maybe actually no learning and improvement has actually happened here. But if in our minds we're looking, you referred to the metaphor of the stepping stones across the river, or those little steps up a hill or up a mountainside, maybe it's that we need to be celebrating more often. And as you say, finding the success and feeding that success back to students so that they're more likely to take further steps forward, upwards.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think actually, credit where credit is due, PE teachers are really good at that anyway.
I agree.
Now, I don't think that I'm telling people anything they don't already know, or that they don't already do. It's just whether they really have explicitly realized that they do it, and have they understood the power of it on the perception of the subject to their pupils. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really key to the message, is if we can recognize that every time we identify something successful with a pupil, they get a physical response, physiological response to that praise, that then potentially encourages them to commit to something, engage with something, try something new, stay focused on something when they might be wavering. We can have really significant impacts on pupils with very, very small interactions, and it's a science-based thing. It's a proven chemical reaction. There's nothing unknown about this. It's it's a simple formula that when we praise children and when they feel successful, when they're happy, they get a dopamine and an endorphin hit that makes them feel good. And it's a drug and it's addictive and they want more of it. So they will continue to try to get that same feeling again and again and again. And it's not unique to PE. And you know what? I'm seriously considering that Happiness Factories 2 might not be about PE at all, because all of these things are relevant regardless of what subject we teach. And they're just as relevant to our pastoral programs. And they're just as relevant to the way we interact with pupils in completely different parts of our school environment. It's exactly the same. If we can have a very positive, very success-focused environment, then children are just getting that kind of chemical boost over and over and over again, and just wanting more and more and more of it.
But I think what's interesting, I agree with you that it can be done anywhere, Phil, and it can be done in any subject. But I also look at our context of PE, and we're amongst the only subjects that educate the whole person, that educate the feet as much as they do the brains, the fingers as much as we do the grey matter. You're right. I don't want to knock any subject. I'm a massive fan of all subjects in schools, but you're right. Maths is maths, and it educates almost entirely cognitive function in the brain. We're talking about a subject in PE which has the capacity to educate every single feature, and also educate through those movement experiences. So I do feel that PE is, I think it's fair to say, better positioned to be the catalyst for change in this environment. But I certainly think it's amongst the subjects that can be.
Yeah, I think that currently PE is in a position of flux, whether that's at a micro scale within individual schools or on a global scale. And perhaps PE's always been in that. I mean, there is loads and loads of research going back decades that says we don't really know what PE is. And part of the problem, part of the reason why books like the ones that have come out in the last 12 months and will come out in the next 12 months exist is because we don't all agree on what our subject actually is. And so that, whilst that it can be challenging, that also presents us with a really good opportunity, doesn't it? Because we can create, we can change, we can diversify, we can challenge the status quo in ways that perhaps other subjects can't as much. So yeah, if you're looking for a catalyst, and I think a lot of schools have used PE as a catalyst, it's right there. It's the beautiful combination of physical and mental. And it's a cognitive subject delivered in a physical way. It's a physical subject that can be cognitively stimulating. It can be anything you want it to be, as long as it meets the needs of your pupils. And the only way you determine what those needs are is to put them at the center of everything that you create. And don't necessarily always think that what you're doing in PE needs to be the same as the one at the school down the road, because your pupils are fundamentally different. And that's I think that's a great place to be. And yes, it creates confrontation sometimes between PE teachers and PE researchers and academics. And yes, we get challenged and we don't always agree, but we're PE teachers. We disagree with people all the time in many different ways. We come up against challenge against other PE teachers in sports fixtures all the time. And we know how to deal with that in diplomatic, pleasant, adult, grown-up ways. And this is no different. We can agree to disagree, I think, but if we can learn from each other and we can take bits from what each other are doing and build on top of our already existing excellent curriculums, we're just going to make things better.
That's really interesting, and it sort of brings us to one of the questions I wanted to ask you. And by the way, this is probably the only question I'm going to read out, because you'll see why I'm going to be specific with this question, because there's numerous stakeholders in this question. So this question is as follows. Okay, and I wrote it like this. Phil, you, like I, took part in the debate project back in January 2022. You were there when Lee Sullivan debated Greg Dry about the role of concept teaching through PE. What are your reflections on that experience?
Yeah. yeah, that was in the middle of the night. It was really late at night, and I remember, I just remember this growing sense of where is this going, and it was a fascinating process to go through, and I'm really, really grateful that I was able to be on that call with all of those really outstanding PE practitioners. I mean, every single one of them, from Ronnie through to Vic and Laura. It was just a great group of people to be in conversation with. And what I took away from it was, I think really, I already knew, and I already had the sense of what I thought, and this just cemented it, is that it's okay to disagree, and it's okay to not all feel like we're all searching for the same answer, because we're not, because our answers are different. So if you take my context and Vic's context in Italy, and actually in a lot of ways we're very similar types of PE teachers, but we work in such completely different contexts that what I do would not work for her, and what she does would not work for us here. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's just nothing wrong. If you think about the China conundrum, those guys have got to create a curriculum that is meaningful to their pupils, but they are absolutely dictated to by the Chinese government. They have to do X number of fitness tests every term, and then feed that into a central government database so that the government can pick out the table tennis or the gymnasts of the future and whisk them off to a special sports school. You know, how on earth would my holistic curriculum fit into that model? It's
an excellent example that that summarizes what you're talking about, because you're talking relatively extreme example there, but let's not consider it to be very extreme. This happens in the world. We have more authoritarian type environments. It does happen, and certainly historically it happened very close to home too. But I think you make an excellent point there, because that brings back the real centrality of context.
Yeah, and even within my previous school, just within one school, I worked in a co-ed school in Abu Dhabi, but because of the cultural context, the girls and the boys were not allowed to mix. They weren't even allowed to really see each other. And so we fundamentally wanted to deliver a gender irrelevant curriculum. Okay, you can call it gender neutral or gender equal or whatever you want to call it. But basically what the boys did, the girls did, and what the girls did, the boys did. Mm. And obviously we had to do assessment and reporting, and moderation was very hard, because I couldn't go and watch the girls do PE and the female teachers couldn't come and watch the boys do PE. And incredibly challenging, very unique contextual situation, which required a curriculum that was absolutely unique to that environment in order to achieve those fundamental goals that we wanted, which was equality for all, which was providing a safe space, making children feel encouraged and enthused and positive. I doubt there are very many schools anywhere in the world where I could have just taken that curriculum, thank you very much, plonked it into my school, and everything was going to work. And even within, you take one town in the UK, and within a town you might have 3 comprehensive schools, or you might have 2 comprehensive schools and a grammar school or a private school, whatever it might be. Those children are fundamentally unique cohorts, and what works really well for one group of children could be completely irrelevant and meaningless to the children at the other end of the street. And as long as we are providing opportunities for experience, for enthusiasm, and we're encouraging that sense of the importance of lifelong participation, does it really matter that our curriculums don't look the same? There are some fundamental things that our curriculums should have. So they should be activity driven. Yeah. Activity should be at the heart of everything we do. And I'm a firm believer that there's nothing that we can't teach through activity. And it's something that we've talked about in our department here, is that we do not want to see too much of children sitting listening. We do not want to see queues. We do not want to see lines of children waiting. Nothing that we deliver should not be possible within an active situation, within reason. And every PE curriculum should be inclusive, but it should be inclusive not just in the way we all understand inclusion, but for every single pupil. It should be inclusive because it should be meaningful to them. It's got to have individual purpose and individual positivity and success at the heart of it. And that's inclusion, not necessarily just catering for the children with additional needs and different types of children, different genders, different sexualities, whatever it might be. But every child, from the very most physically competent to the physically weakest, from the cognitively most intelligent to the ones that really struggle, every child is important. And that every child matters. Do you remember that from years ago? It wasn't wrong. It wasn't wrong. Our curriculums have to have purpose and meaning for every single child. And if we can get to that point, it doesn't necessarily mean that we all have to be doing the same thing. In fact, if anything, it's great that we're not, because you only have to look on something like Twitter to see the variety of activities being posted now. Now, everybody tags want to teach PE, don't they? And then 55,000 people see my Squid Games game of whatever it was that I created last week, and that's brilliant. Then that's great. Within reason, let's all share our different ideas. Let's have different ideas. Let's try different things. Let's do different things. Now, I want to be borrowing stuff off Ben Shields from Bangkok and trying it in my school in Riyadh, and I want to be picking stuff up from High Halstow in the UK and trying it on my field. And some of it will work and some of it won't. But it's exciting and it's engaging, and you're going to spark something through a child through trying something different that could just lead to that child being active for years to come, which at the end of the day that's what we're trying to do.
I love it. And I've circled something you said here. I hope I'm quoting you correctly. You said there's nothing that cannot be learned through movement. And I think that is a phenomenally powerful statement, because whilst I have the deepest respect for other subjects, I teach 2 or 3 other subjects on the curriculum as well as PE. I'm not sure anybody can make that claim in other areas. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe in music, maybe in drama, maybe in art, maybe you can make those claims. Perhaps I'm just not aware of it. But that to me is not necessarily a competitive statement. That is a highly aspirational statement. And I think it's extremely useful. I think it brings a certain sense of pressure. Sometimes as PE teachers, we might start to feel like, well, is it my job to teach everything? And I think probably the answer is no. Probably the answer to that is use your context and use the environment you have to develop the broadest range of successes that you can for those young people.
Yeah, there's a really interesting conversation about mental health, isn't there? And are PE teachers mental health experts? Most of us are not. Should we be teaching mental health within PE? It's debatable. It is in the book, and I think it's an important conversation to be having, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we should be teaching it. We should certainly be touching on it, and we should be making sure that our children understand that mental health within our context is important. But whether we should be teaching it or not is, still up for debate, I think. And some schools will and some schools won't. There's the conversation about grit. I love the conversation about grit and resilience. And should we be teaching these kids to be resilient? And if we should be, how do we teach them resilience? And don't we have to teach them how to lose in order to be resilient? Because it's only through losing that we understand how to go again. And what does resilience is different to every child at the end of the day. You can't say I'm going to teach my kids to be resilient and they're all going to get it in exactly the same way, because it means different things to different children, and it means different things to different people. Some people have a bad day, go home and cry for 20 minutes and then feel much better about life. Some people go to the gym and smash a punch bag, and that's how they deal with their frustrations or their disappointments. And resilience is a totally subjective thing. So how do we teach that? Right?
Yeah,
so individual schools can take concepts that they think will work within their context, and deliver those. You don't have to deliver them all, as much as, you know, there are curriculums out there that you take off the shelf and you bolt in. And, you know, a really good friend of mine has created a fantastic one, and you know, you'll know, and I know, he'll know who we're talking about. Doesn't mean, and he would tell you this, that you don't have to teach all of it. You can take the bits that are most powerful to your school currently and deliver that really well and give more meaning to what you're doing through that. You don't have to teach all of it. There's 10 in the book, 15 in the book, something like that. And if you introduced one on top of what you currently offer, then you're expanding your provision and you're finding more opportunities to praise children and make them feel successful.
It's brilliant. I want to ask you a couple more things. First of all, staying focused on PE and staying focused on happiness factories here. And I'm sure you do this at times, Phil, but when you're sat with, let's refer to them as a newly qualified teacher, of course, slightly old language at this point. What's your advice to a PE teacher who's new to the profession? What do you want them to draw away from you? What do you want them to take from you as the key message?
That's a really good question. In some ways, I don't need to give you the answer now, because the answer is out there. There's an A to Z of how to do that. From a guy who I have an awful lot of time for, actually. So if you're looking for a second book after my one, that's a pretty good place to start. Newly qualified teachers are, by their very nature, the best of us in a lot of ways. You know, the passion and the commitment and the drive and the enthusiasm. You know, they're not browbeaten by years of long days and weekend fixtures and huge sports tournaments, and their knees still work and their shoulders don't ache when they get up in the morning, and all these things that when you get to our age, my age anyway, you start to feel are going against you. But they also have really powerful recent experiences of what PE is. And I think tapping into that is really valuable. And the more that we progress as a subject area, the more those experiences are more than just sport based. And so when I talk to newly qualified teachers a lot, because quite often they contact me and ask me about working abroad. And what I'm finding is more and more of them have the perception of PE as being more than just sport. And sport is now talked about by them as a vehicle to something else, as opposed to the final outcome, final objective. And there's this really, really lovely perception growing that sport and PE are different things. They're delivered by the same people, and only PE teachers can do that because we're great. And you know, we can deliver two completely different subjects because that's why we're PE teachers, because we're just brilliant people. And you know, all the people that are out there listening to this, you're brilliant, and you do what you do because of that. You stand above the rest because you are a PE teacher, as much as other people don't necessarily think that PE teachers are. You know, the whole if you can't teach PE, or you don't do any marking, and all of that garbage that we have to put up with. But at the end of the day, you teach two subjects without even realizing it. And that perception of difference, I think, is a really positive thing. Doesn't mean you can't teach sport in PE, just like it doesn't mean you can't teach World War II in history. Doesn't mean that you can't teach physics in triple science. It's still a fundamental part of our subject area, but it's not what our subject is. Our subject is so much more. You know, the meaningful PE guys will tell you that our subject is physical literacy. That's what we teach. Sport is a vehicle, a really powerful vehicle for teaching something fundamentally more important, which is being able to move effectively, competently, being able to understand what our body feels like in different situations, being able to identify if there's something wrong with our body, and understanding what we can do to improve that. That's fundamentally more important than whether or not I know the intricacies of volleyball rotations. Because how many of us are going to go on and play professional or even semi-competitive volleyball and need to understand volleyball rotations? But I need to know if I've hurt my knee. and what I can do about it and what I should or shouldn't do. Or I need to know how to be able to move effectively so that I can carry my children in 15 years once I've got a family without ending up injured. Or I need to understand the importance of going to the gym regularly or participating in some form of physical activity regularly to keep myself healthy and try and stay disease free. These are critical things that fall into that idea of physical literacy that can be delivered through sport, but don't necessarily mean the same thing as sport.
It's really
I think that makes sense.
I think it's really interesting that there's a story that's sort of blown up in the last few days here in the UK, and I want to be cautious how I describe it because I'm not involved in the sort of conversations. But weekend football in Merseyside has been cancelled this weekend coming because there has been so many detrimental and questionable behaviours towards referees and towards coaches. People, including the players, including the parents, at times the coaches as well. And the conversation has gone on, why in youth football do we have this such negative behaviour taking place and such cynical behaviour taking place? And lots of people have put it down to all kinds of things. Now, I rang up a radio station, had a conversation, and I said, look, one of the things we have to acknowledge here is that football has moved to be almost entirely community-based and club-based. And it is far less sort of school-based than it used to be. And that is one of the contributing factors here, because when you, for example, using your language, Phil, do sport in a school, even though it's competitive, the primary objective of that sport is still an educational process. You're still there to learn. Yes, okay, you're looking to win a match or whatever, but you're there to learn. And I was making the argument there should be much clearer links between schools and between PE organisations and PE departments and community, in this case, football type provision, so that the focus and emphasis of what it should be for young people could be shared and better understood by more people. Because people go into that sporting environment the weekend and what do they focus on? I want my under-8s to win a football match. It is not necessarily a useful vehicle in that context to then go and have those kids learn something. So anyway, yeah, go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's really interesting, isn't it? There was a fairly vociferous Twitter backlash against a post that I saw a while ago now, a couple of months ago, where a under-8s football team was scouting for players, and somebody wrote, "Well, you turn my kids away, and I brought my kids to you to play football and you turn them away, and now you're advertising for a central defender, like they're 8 years old, 7 years old." What? And yeah, that win at all cost mentality. Or in fact, it's not even a win at all cost mentality, is it? That perception of the success being based on something as tokenistic as a W, I think is something that it's something I think we're moving away from. I think we are getting a better understanding of the lack of need for tokenist societies. My boss, who the guy that I currently work with now, who is another big reason why I came here, and if he's listening, then he knows. We'll talk to you about tokenist societies and the fact that we at our school are a completely non-tokenist society, so we don't extrinsically recognize things like sporting success. We do it in much more subtle ways. So individual conversations, individual emails home to parents, those kind of things. We don't do big award ceremonies. And we had an athletics festival today at school, which was fully inclusive, and every child was invited, regardless of who they were within those age groups. And we did not have a results announcement at the end or an award ceremony, and each school that came will get the results and they can choose how they want to celebrate in their own way. And that takes away that competition. And please don't get me wrong, if you're listening to this, I'm not one of these people that says there's no place for competition in schools. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, when we're trying to look for ways to reward children, those intrinsic, less tokenistic approaches can actually be the most powerful, because they're the things that give that perception of personal achievement that we're looking to give to those children. And if you can do that and give trophies and awards and things at the end of the season, then brilliant. But those little conversations and those little moments of individual recognition and individual praise is so much more powerful in the long.
I completely agree with that. And I am a very, very strong believer that competition in any field actually is a brilliant opportunity for exemplifying learning. And it is a brilliant vehicle for the development of learning in a broad range of things. But if we only put that, as you referred to it earlier, as if the only thing we can learn through competition at times is that grit and resilience because we've lost and it's not a great feeling. Okay, there might be a little bit of that at times if we play the cup final or whatever. Yeah, it's inevitable. But there's so many other things that one can learn through a competitive environment that trump that by far. And I'm very much with you on that same page. And I want to keep the conversation on football for this last question, Phil, because you are a previous resident of the UAE, and you have lived, at least in my mind, close to Qatar and in a culture that is probably not massively dissimilar to that around Doha and other places in Qatar. And I want to ask you, what are we? I think we're 4 weeks out from the Men's World Cup taking place in Qatar. I want to ask you what you think, other than the football success and failures, which are inevitable, what do you think will be the dominant stories that come out of Qatar in the next 2 months?
Thanks, James. Well, I think we all know, don't we? I think I have to be a little bit careful because of where I am, and you never know who's listening on the internet. But actually, the thing that yeah, I have to word this very carefully. One of the things I've realised, having lived in the Middle East for quite a long time now, and been to lots of different parts of the Middle East, is in there is a movement, there is a progressiveness that perhaps doesn't necessarily get quite so much recognition than it maybe it should. And different countries are at different levels of that, and different countries have slightly different takes on that, what progressiveness means. And yes, there are some issues. And I had a long conversation with the Wise PE guys a while ago, whilst I was in the UAE, for their podcast about gender equality and those kind of things, which were very difficult for us in the UAE, in a segregated school that was a British curriculum school, but was fundamentally a boys' school and a girls' school, and trying to find that gender balance and those kind of things. Having lived in Saudi Arabia for 3 months so far, I am staggered how progressive this country is, and it just doesn't. And I absolutely know that there will be people in the UK that will be seeing a different perception of Saudi Arabia, and yes, they absolutely are not getting everything right all the time. But and it's fair to say that I am slightly sheltered from some of it because I work in an international school with an international cohort of children, some of which are Saudi Arabian, and Middle Eastern and Arabic, but there's also Chinese children from Southeast Asia and children from America. So I understand that my context doesn't necessarily give me the full picture, but I am surprised, having come from the UAE, which is perceived to be much more westernized now, actually how progressive this country is. And I think it is generally moving in the right direction. I think in terms of Qatar and the World Cup, there will be lots of media stories about certain things. And Qatar will tell you, quite rightly, I guess, that they have cultural considerations that are different to those we have in places like the UK and America. And it's about finding, as with anything in life, it's about finding balance, isn't it? It's about trying to stay positive, trying to make positive change, and trying to see positive intent. And that's something, again, coming back to my school, that's something we talk about a lot, is the idea of positive intent. Like, generally, most people are decent on an individual level, and regardless of where you come from in the world, most people are decent human beings. And if we perceive everybody as trying to have positive intent in their actions and their motivations, then generally we as societies can move forward. You know as well as I do what the conversations are going to be when it comes to the World Cup in Qatar, and they will probably be different here to the ones that you'll have there. And I'm absolutely not condoning certain things. And I still retain my British identity and my liberalism that comes from being lucky enough to have been born in the UK. And I think that's really important. I think the messaging that will come out of the UK in various different ways towards liberalising the world, I think is really important. And I think people will listen. I just really hope it doesn't overshadow, at the end of the day, a major, massive sporting occasion. It's a huge thing for this part of the world, and people, whether or not the Middle East should have got the World Cup at this stage is not for me to say at all. But it is a huge thing, and the buzz within the Middle East is massive. It was huge in the UAE. It's huge here now, and it can only be a good thing, because it's exposing the Middle East to the rest of the world, and the rest of the world to the Middle East, and people will see that this is a part of the world that is changing, and I wouldn't be here if it wasn't, and I wouldn't be trying to do the things I'm trying to do within my tiny bit of it, if I didn't believe that there was value to it.
Yeah, it's
was that diplomatic enough?
I think it's a really interesting point. I have I think pretty much the same take as you have. I mean, I don't have anywhere near the experience you have in the Middle East, so I can't comment on that so much. But the potential, we're coming back to the same principle, aren't we? We're coming back to progressiveness and learning through movement. Okay, this might be learning through, hopefully, Harry Kane and Gareth Bale and so on scoring goals, depending on where you happen to hail from. But that to me is an exciting opportunity. I, like you, also recognize some of the current and immediate sort of cultural clashes that there are between the way different parts of the world see different considerations. But I do agree with you that sport, that movement is a potential vehicle for what we've described as learning, could be described as change. So I do think that's potentially really exciting to see.
So here's a story for you. So I got a taxi when my wife followed me on to Riyadh, because the way the visas work here. And so she arrived 2 weeks ago. My daughter and my wife and I got in a taxi to go to the local mall for dinner. And the taxi driver said to us in very broken English, where are you from? And we said, we're from England. And he said, were you at London 2012? And I said, yeah, actually I was a games maker. And he showed us a picture of this lady with a hijab on. He said, do you know who this is? And I said, no, I don't. He said, this is my sister. And I said, all right, okay, thanks very much. He said, do you know who she is? No, I don't know who she is. She was the first woman to represent Saudi Arabia at the Olympics.
I remember that. I don't remember.
And he was so proud. And so he was telling us about how she's gone on to start up a judo dojo for girls, and she's doing judo in school, and she's inspired this whole generation of girls to take up judo. She created her own line of judo clothing for girls that need to wear hijabs, and the pride coming out of this taxi driver for what his sister had done, what his sister was doing. And then he started reading off all these other names, and literally no idea, could have been making them all up, but they were all the women that were going to go to the next Olympics for Saudi Arabia. And that just shows that times they are a change. And whilst there is still, in many parts of the world, not just the Middle East, there are other parts of the world facing similar, if not more challenging situations at the moment. But things are changing, and we are all very slowly, most of us are all very slowly coming together, and it's good. And yeah, if sport can be part of that process, if physical activity and movement can be part of that process, then that's even better for us.
Agreed. Fantastic. And I had an interesting experience recently where I got into a traffic jam because 90,000 people were trying to get to Wembley Stadium to watch England versus USA, and this happened to be a women's match. So things are changing. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think both you and I, Phil, and you've said it numerous times already, no one here is suggesting that there aren't issues. We know, and we certainly don't want to provide the impression that you just wash things under there, you just brush things
No,
under.
not at all.
I think we all have. I've spent a lot of time with Srihan, for example, and the importance of these sorts of things. So, but at the same time, I think our comments here that progressiveness or progression has to come in one format, one structure or another, and perhaps movement, in this case competitive sport, is a fantastic vehicle for that change and that necessary change. So good stuff. And Phil, a couple of bits of things from me that I want to share with you while we're recording. First of all, I just want to congratulate you on what you've achieved. I think,
thank you.
Regardless of anything else, regardless of sales, success, this person reviews the book, this person, in my opinion, as someone who occasionally has the pondering thought of, oh, shouldn't I, in terms of authoring, and obviously I publish writing every single week, I want to say that I think you've done something really, really fantastic. And I think you should be, extremely satisfied with what you've achieved and getting that forward. I want to mention again, John Catt Publications, which whether people are following the sort of the literary word, I can't know, but both you and I know they're a very well respected publisher and do a fantastic job in their sector. And I think the fact that you're working with them is really, really impressive. And I also want to express a personal thanks to you, Phil, because you're someone that over the course of probably the last 3 or 4 years, I've got to know slightly better. And our relationship has always been absolutely centrally positive and enthusiastic and collaborative and sharing. And I just wanted to mention on record, as it were, how much I value that and how much I'm looking forward to that going forward. And
thanks, mate.
It's great to have colleagues like you. It's great to be able to discuss things with you, to invite you onto daft stuff like podcasts, and know that you're going to go with it and answer questions and give it a good old go. And I just I really value you as a person. I just wanted to share that.
Thank you, my friend, and vice versa. Yeah, I think I try to assume positive intent in everything. I am not an expert. I am just a PE teacher who sat down one day at a computer and started writing. I don't have all the answers. I don't even know what all the questions are. And people like yourself, people like Lee and Greg and Laura and Vic, and they're far more knowledgeable about all of this kind of stuff than I am. But I've got lived experience, and I've had wonderful interactions with people like yourself over the last few years. I'm excited to see where we all go together. Whether there's another story to tell at some point in the future, maybe there will be, if I can find another 20 people that want to write some words for me. But I'm just really enthused by watching where our subject goes. I'm fascinated to see where I end up. I keep having conversations with Laura, who's at St Mary's, about coming back and getting into teacher training, which I think I'd really enjoy. But I've got a job to do first, and this, the book and everything, and these conversations is all part of that. Long may it continue.
Absolutely. Well said, mate. And it's been brilliant again to chat to you. And I know for a fact people find this really useful and really inspiring. So fair play to you, mate. Thank you again.
Excellent. Thanks, James.